Okay, welcome to the Elokus podcast. We are now this is going to be class number 14 in the Discourse of Chukas. It's going to be the fourth, which is the seventh chapter in the overall book of B'Shosh Ekdimu 5672. So this is class number 14, but it's also the fourth class in chapter 28. And we're going to start the second paragraph today of chapter 28, where he rounds back up to the beginning of the discourse, where he deals with the parsha, which is actually really good because this week's parsha is Parshas Chukas. I was a little bit out for the last few days, but let me try to do maybe even 3 classes to finish this. Maybe we can finish it in 2 classes, so we finish the Chukas part while it's still Parshas Chukas. Okay, here we are. So we finished the chapter. Again, when we say the chapter, we finished the main beer in the chapter 28. The main idea was that the tzimtzum on the Or Ein Sof has 2 phases, almost 2 dimensions to it. One is the higher element of the Or Ein Sof, the Sphira Saint Kates, that has to be removed completely, and which that itself allows the potential for 10 spheres hagnuzais, the 10 hidden spheres to be highlighted, for them to be for the 10 spheres hagnuzais to be kind of come into focus. 10 spheres hagnuzais means the 10 hidden potentials, but as they are all wrapped in one. And then later, the second symptom is to allow for each of these potentials to come out kind of on their own. And that already is a symptom of derech miut, as he says. That's a diminishment. And you can listen to the last 2 classes to follow all of this. Now, the one thing, however, that he left off was that when we say that the original tzimtzum, the original contraction, was a complete the phase A of the contraction, doesn't leave anything of the sphere of Saint Kates, of that infinite light. He says, however, because a davar shebekadusha, since holiness, when it goes away, it leaves a roishim, it leaves a mark. So there is a mark left over. And that roishim of the Or Ein Sof, of the higher level of the Or Ein Sof, is, he says, Yesh Loima, we can say that that's the Or Ein Sof that's in Chachma. We say that in Chachma, Sphere is a Chachma. There is the Or Ein Sof is Shore there. The infinite light dwells in Chachma. That means that there is, notwithstanding all the contractions and all the phases that it takes to get to the actual 10 spheres of Atzilus, and in general, that's to limit the lights, to reveal only a little droplet, a little crumb, so to speak. Chachma is considered a little yud and nothing. So that's what's left over. We've diminished and we've kind of gone away from the Or Ein Sof. However, we say that in Or Ein Sof is Shaira dwells, or in Chachma dwells the Or Ein Sof. So he says that Or Ein Sof is not just a crumb, so to speak, or a revelation of the second dimension of the Or Ein Sof, if you might say, the Esespheres Hagnuzos, but actually of the original Or Ein Sof, which was removed completely, besides a mark. And that mark remains present in Chachma. And if you've learned Tanya, you realize that that's in every single neshama. Every soul has Chachma. And that's where the Or Ein Sof, that's where our Amunah is, that's where our power of Mesirat Nefesh comes from. That's our essential bond with God's very self. So he's pinpointing that on that pinpoint of Chachma, where that trace is there. Now we have one little parenthesis that we didn't learn yet. It is the second to the last parenthesis on Daf Mem Hey in page Chav Ches, which we skipped. And let's go back to that. And then we're going to continue the concluding paragraph of the discourse. Now, when he says that there is a roishim of the Or Ein Sof, he wants to differentiate that from another reshima, another trace, which we also speak about when the Or Ein Sof disappeared, it left over traces. However, the leftover traces, which is the shorish of the kalim, which is where from this, we usually call that the reshimu, the regular idea of reshimu. So he wants that we shouldn't confuse the two. This is not the reshimu, which is a trace of the Or Ein Sof that's infinite. The Mavur b'Makam, it's explained earlier, which is a roishim trace of the original light that is left over in those letters. Remember those letters, which are the Shorish HaKelim, the root of the vessels, that do not become even recognized, which is the Koach HaGvul, the power of limitation of God, that does not become noticeable until the Tzimtzum removes the light, so that we can see the power of Gvul, we can see the Kelim. So in the Kelim, there is still a trace of the Or Ein Sof. That's what we say in the Kelim itself. So he says this is not to be understood as the same Roshim of the Or Ein Sof that we say when we're speaking of over here, the removal of the light and its leftover mark, which is going to be present in the Oiros, not in the Kelim. Now, that's the point over here. We have to differentiate between the trace of the Or Ein Sof that is there in the letters, which the letters become the hidden letters of the Or Ein Sof, which they are the power of the Rishimu, which they are the kind of the original source of the vessels, and that needs to be differentiated from the mark of the Or. And now we're not talking about vessels. Let's not talk about vessels. Because even when we go from the first stage of the Or and we go to the second stage of the Or, which are the Esesphiris Agnuzos, according to this Pirush of the Arizal, according to this understanding, we're not bringing in the vessels yet. It's within the Or itself. There's a drop. When I say a drop, I mean a free fall. We're falling from the Or Ein Sof being Sphiros Ein Kates, and then we're suddenly sensing a power which is still Or Ein Sof, but it's kind of it's imagining or estimating or having a desire for 10 spheres, for a finite structure. But it's all Or. So in that new Or of Esa Spherois Hagnuzos, there is still a drop of the Or Ein Sof. When we say a drop, we mean a Tzesiluk Lagamri was completely removed, but a mark is there. And this mark is different than the mark that's going to be in the Kelim. Why? The Sham over there, Liyosh Zebchenes Koyach HaGavul Shebe Ein Sof. Since over there, the Oisiyos is the Koyach HaGavul. The letters of the Koyach HaGavul. So even though inside these osios is a something above the osios, but since they are embedded in the Koach HaGavul, which is, so the Koach HaGavul covers on it. So even though there is a Koach HaBli Gavul from the original light, but it's obscured, it's not Gilui, it's obscured by the Kalim, by the Koach HaGavul. Now, the power of Gvul completely blocks us from this trace. Although the trace is there, it's almost like not impactful. It's not gonna make itself be known. Okay, that's why he says that's why that trace of the light is in a state of concealment. In the letters. What you're going to see is the letters, you're not going to feel inside of them that there is a trace of the light. However, in our case, since when we're talking now about Roshim, the Roshim of Or Ein Sof A, as it is present in Or Ein Sof B, which means in the Esesphiris Agnuzos, since we're not dealing with Kelim, we're just dealing with a more narrower light, and since the light is not about Gavul, it's not about concealment, it's about revelation. We discussed that in an earlier class just recently, that the lights are always, even the Esesphiros Agnuzos, they're not about Kalim, it's not about anything else, it's about expressing God. So it's about revelation. And therefore, the revelation of the Esesphiros Agnuzos that contain in themselves a Roshim of the Or Ein Sof HaBli Gvul, they leak the Or Ein Sof HaBli Gvul. They don't have their lips tight shut. Since they're about, it's like someone who has a job to observe, is a spy. He has a job to observe and be silent. So this guy can, even if he has very, very, very powerful secrets, able to keep it quiet. But someone whose job is to be the spokesman and to speak is just that to speak to give over a certain limited kind of thing, it's far more possible that this person, because they're here to reveal, will leak also something that maybe they're not supposed to say. If you want me to be quiet, I'll be quiet. You want me to talk? So then automatically something is going to come through. That's the point over here. The Roshim of the Or Ein Sof, that's infinite, that is present in the Esespheres Agnuzais, since they are about Giloi, the Or that's inside of them is also about Giloi. And that's why we learned in the last class, if you remember the last class a few days ago, we learned in the last class that the Kav, which is a product, a byproduct of the Esespheres Agnuzais. But we learned that the Kav also has an ability to unify all the spheres. It sets limits, but it also unifies. And we learned, why does it unify? Because in it is sparkling the Or Ein Sof that's beyond all limitations. That means it's being revealed. And the second thing is V'gam ba b'bchenas koyach gevuli. That in the other Rishimu, it not only is it the fact that it's concealment, the oisios is the idea is to conceal, but there's another element is that it's inside a setting of gvul, which is the idea of koyach gevuli. Chukas and Maamor stated elsewhere. Exactly how this is different than the first idea. Let's just say I don't know right now. I didn't. It seems to be slight another nuance. But in the root of the lights, it's revealed, and that's why the Or Ein Sof is affects. So when we say that the Or Ein Sof, for example, is shoreh inside of us, inside each and every one of us, it's not in the kelim of our. It's not dwelling in the keli of our chachma. It's dwelling in the Or of our chachma. There is the keli of our neshama, our keli of our the vessel of our chachma. Then there is the Or HaChachma that's in the neshama. But that Or HaChachma is already somewhat a defined light. Inside of it is riding, so to speak, a shoyre, the Or Ein Sof that is higher than everything, infinite sheba, infinite. And that is present in the Or. And the Or doesn't obscure it. And that's why we have Amunah. And that's why we have absolute conviction in God. That's why we can completely dissolve our entire structure of existence, every element of ourselves, and disappear completely. That's what Mesiras Nefesh means. We disappear completely from existence. We delete ourselves completely in front of God. Because in front of the Or Ein Sof that is completely above the Esespheres Agnuzais, nothing else exists but him. All shapes, forms, definitions are null and void in the infinite light. Okay. So this concludes this concludes the first paragraph. And based on this, we're going to come back and explain the Parshat Chukas. We're rounding back to our Parsha. And based on all the above, Yuvam will understand the three questions that he asked in the beginning. This is going back to class number 1 in the 7th discourse. Zos Chukas, class number 1. Over there, we opened up the discourse with, I'm saying this week's Parsha because today is Thursday, Parshas Chukas. And over here, it's the mitzvah of the red heifer. And he asked 3 questions. First question was when God says, "V'daber Hashem al Moshe," God speaks to Moshe, and he says, "Daber el bnei Yisroel," speak to the Jewish people, and tell them, "Zos chukas haTorah." This is the statute of the Torah. Asher tziva Hashem is the law of the Torah. Asher tziva Hashem that God commanded. So the first question was, if God is the one speaking, it shouldn't say that God commanded. It should say, "V'daber Hashem al Moshe leimor, Zos chukas haTorah Asher tzivisi," that I am commanding, because God is speaking. When you say Zos chukas haTorah Asher tziva Hashem, is implying there's a third person speaking. But a moment earlier you said that God is speaking. V'daber Hashem. If Moshe would be the one speaking, V'daber Moshe al bnei Yisroel, Zos tziva Hashem, that would make sense. But God is speaking. So that was the first question. Second question: why is it that the red heifer is one mitzvah that the procedure is done outside of the 3 camps? The all other karbonot are done the inside temple, but the red heifer had to be done out. They burnt it outside of the Beit HaMikdash, outside even of the camp of the Levites. It was on a mountain facing, and it was done outside, I think, all 3 camps. And from that place is where they burnt it, and they sprinkled the blood towards the temple, but from the outside. That was the second question. And third question was, why was it done through Elazar? Why was Elazar the one? Elazar is not the high priest. Aaron was the high priest at that time, so Aaron should have been the one who did it. Why was it his son? Elazar later became the high priest, but at the time that this red heifer was done, it was done by Elazar. Why Elazar? So these three questions he's going to answer now based on the ideas and interweaving it into the ideas that we spoke earlier in this whole discourse. And basically, he's going to speak about the idea that in general, through mitzvot, we reach beyond creation. And since the source of creation, and we draw the beyond creation into creation, and since the we've just explained how the design of creation begins, so to speak, if you trace it back, all the way to the beginning of the beginning, the design of creation starts in the Esespheres Agnuzais. That's when you start having already some kind of an imprint in the Or Ein Sof. So he's going to show that Torah and mitzvot reach and touch and draw forth from above the Esespheres Agnuzais, which is really Or Ein Sof A, the level of Or Ein Sof, the levels of Spheres Ein Kates. And in as much as we tap it to a tiny little bit, in other words, we hit the Rosham. We hit that Rosham of the Or Ein Sof. Because we're saying that Rosham, that little trace is there, and the trace of the Or Ein Sof is also infinite. That's what we're tapping on. And that's really there by all mitzvahs. But by paraduma, by red heifer, since it involves the service of tshuva, which is much more potent than regular mitzvahs, we yank, we pull at the Or Ein Sof much higher and much stronger than in a regular mitzvahs. Regular mitzvahs, we maybe tweak it, or rather like trigger a tiny bit, only in the Rosham of the Or Ein Sof. But what is before the tzimtzum, the first tzimtzum A, at the first tzimtzum, we're not really touching so much. We're only tapping on the Rosham. But in paraduma, we're actually reaching the Or Ein Sof, literally that's before the tzimtzum. In its full, not just the Rosham. And we're bringing that down into the world. That's kind of going to be the idea. I give it to give a little structure. Okay. It says, so he's going to show us how man's purpose in the world is to add to creation. There is creation the way God created it, and then our work is to add to creation. And this was expressed or personified in the fact that when God created Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, he put them into Gan Eden. In other words, we might think that our improvement to the world is after we messed it up. God created the world in perfection. When we messed it up, Adam and Eve messed it up. Then we have Torah mitzvahs to fix the world, to do the repairs because we broke it. And that's true. When we learn Torah and we do mitzvot, we repair the world and do tshuva. We repair the world from the damage that we made. But what he's going to show is that no, even the initial attempt, when Adam and Eve were put in the Garden of Eden before they sinned, and the world was in its perfection, they were meant to improve it. And that's what we see, because it says, that Hashem put him, Adam, in Gan Eden, la'avda, to work the garden, or the shamra, and to guard it. And the sages say that work was not just to be a physical gardener. The sages say, la'avda, to work the garden, zura machmitzah say, this is the 248 positive commandments, or the shamra, and to guard it, shesam mitzvah say, are by guarding the 365 prohibitive commandments. But Medrash, that's what the sages say. I don't know where. Over here, I don't have the footnotes that say where that is. But it's a famous thing brought in Chassidus all the time. But the second one, it looks like it's a Maamor Chazal, probably from the Talmud. But then there is a Midrash where the Midrash says, that particularly Adam's job in Adam Arishon's job in Gan Eden was to bring sacrifices. And what does that mean? It's because in general Torah and mitzvot, and particularly through sacrifices, and he's going to show that sacrifices also have application even without an animal, physical animal. Also, the animal inside the person, we'll see soon. Through this, we bring added light. If Hashem put him into Gan Eden, that means we're adding light even to Gan Eden. And that's a big chiddush. Because you might say to improve our world, fine, to bring some godly light into it's a dark world. But here we're talking about the Garden of Eden, which was full of divine revelation. Garden of Eden wasn't just a beautiful garden. It was a garden filled with godly revelation. But he's going to explain our job was to bring into the godly revelation of Gan Eden a level that is way above what would be naturally in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. Gan Eden ksiv, because first he's going to explain how Gan Eden in general is much higher, even from just the way God made it. It's much higher than our lowly world. Vayita, it says Vayita Havai Elokim, that Hashem planted. Hashem Elokim planted a garden. Now, and the sages say that over there it's written Shem Mole. It's written with God's full name. Havaya Elokim. That the Tetragrammaton is mentioned. Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Elokim, the Lord. That he planted in Gan Eden. Shebe Gan Eden, that in Gan Eden may Gilu Shem Havaya. Oh, so Shem Mole, meaning unlike the rest of creation. In the rest of creation, it doesn't mention Havaya, at least at the time of creation. It mentions that Vayomer Elokim, Elokim, Elokim. It says 32 times Elokim in the work of creation, but it doesn't mention Havaya until the end. But in Gan Eden, immediately it says Vayita Havaya Elokim. So that tells you that there is, and that comes to indicate that Gan Eden is unlike the world. Elokim generally is the name of God that obscures and hides. The power of Gevura, the power of Tzimtzum, the power of contraction, the power of nature, of concealment. But Havaya is the name of God above time and space, which is revelation. In Gan Eden, Havaya Elokim indicates it's a place which you can see godliness. Shazau Yisroel Gan Eden ala Oilamos. This is the advantage of Gan Eden over all general worlds, not just our physical world. Even there's higher worlds, but there in every world there is the outside of the world and there is the Gan Eden of the world. And the Gan Eden of that world is always a place of revelation. Shehein, because the worlds come, Mishem Elokim, from the name of Elokim, B'chinas Helam, from concealment. Gan Eden Meir Shem Havaya, and in Gan Eden it shines the name Havaya, B'chinas Giloy, there's revelation. V'hu Inyan, and this is in general, this is also the concept and the idea of what the sages say, that with the two letters, God created both this world and the world to come. With the Hey, he created our world. And with the Yud, he created the world to come, which includes Gan Eden. So Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, is created with the Yud. And over here he says something interesting. When we say the Hey is creating this world, in general, that means Elokim. Even though the Hey, which Hey? It's the Hey of Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. But since it's the Hey, especially it means the lower Hey, Malchut, which is the lower Hey. Malchut is also associated with the name of Elokim. So when it says our world is created with the Hey, in general that means the power of Elokim. However, this that it says that the future world, Olam Haba, or the Gan Eden worlds, are created with the Yud. Yud is the first letter of Havaya. It means over there's revelation of Havaya. Which is Chachma. Chachma is revealed in Gan Eden. And that's the revelation of pleasure that's in Gan Eden. That is the reason why Gan Eden is so pleasurable. Gan Eden is so pleasurable because God is pleasurable. Where God is revealed is an enormous pleasure. And we know the pleasures of Gan Eden are incomparable to any pleasure of this world. It's worth dying for those pleasures. Right? If we say Gan Eden is such an enormous place of indulgence in divine pleasure because Havaya is revealed, so then why does it say Vayita? Vayita means he planted. Now, planting are the trees. I think this is what he means. Not so clear on the question. Planting means the trees. It's not yet the fruit. So, which would mean that we don't have any fruits yet, but we have trees. We have plantings in it. So, which implies that if it would be just a full revelation of Havaya, then Havaya would be the fruit of Gan Eden. Vayita implies that Havaya Elokim is doing some kind of a planting, which is a diminishment. It's called a planting. Because nevertheless, it's legabe atainik shebechachma. You can't compare the tainuk, the pleasure that is in Gan Eden, which is stemming from the revelation of Chachma, which is the first of the 10 Sfirot, which, as we said earlier before, contains the infinite light. So the revelation of Chachma is not Gan Eden. Gan Eden is where the lights of Chachma flows. There is some revelation. We know that Gan Eden, by the way, comes like this. It says in Hasidus different places. Eden is a spring. From the Eden comes a river. V'nohar yotzeh, a river. A river is the Bina. And the spring is Chachma. The river is Bina. And Bina waters the garden. And the garden is a Malchut. So obviously, the pleasures of the water which come from the spring that are flowing through the river that are reaching Gan Eden, and over there is where they're watering the trees which are planting, and even is what it's gone a long way from the potency, from the powerful infinite pleasure and delight of Chachma, which would be impossible for any creation ever to experience. So that's what he's saying over here. You can't compare the pleasure of Gan Eden to the pleasure of Chachma itself. Just like the plant, which is not in the same quality like the fruit. That's where I was taking that this is what seems like he's saying that Natiyah, planting, is less than the things. Because here he says, the planting is not like the fruit. The fruit is in Chachma. Here you get the trees. You get to walk around the trees and indulge in the garden. Right? But that is Gan Eden, enormous revelation of Havaya. Not just Havaya, the Yud of Havaya is even revealed. The powerful lights of Chachma are radiating into Gan Eden, releasing immense pleasure, divine pleasure in Gan Eden. However, it's still only a Natiyah. It's only a planting. However, when Adam and Eve were placed in Gan Eden, La'avdal l'shamar, to work it and to guard it, which means to improve the garden. It means to pump more revelation from Chachma into the garden. The Torah mitzvahs, through the avoda of, which we said earlier, to work the garden, to guard the garden, means positive commandments and prohibitive commandments. V'avodas are karbanos, and then the service of karbanos, because according to the Midrash, that's what it means to serve it, which in general, primarily that means refining our animal soul. What is it? What is a sacrifice? You take an animal, you elevate it, which means particularly within the human being, not just learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, but to making a mensch out of ourselves. Generally, we're animalistic, very much attached to physical, material pleasures. And when we direct our energies and elevate our physical desires and wants towards serving God, first by submitting them to the service of God, by surrendering them, and then by refining them, that they too want some kind of a connection towards holiness, godliness, and so forth, which is the idea of the Adam ki yakrav mikem, that a person offers from themselves this avoda. This is delightful to God. God knows that even though He created us coarse, we are lifting ourselves up, we're refining ourselves, we're elevating ourselves to Him. It causes God to engage more with us. It causes God to pump more light into Gan Eden. From Chachma. Because we said before, even though Chachma is present in Gan Eden, Vayita Havaya Elokim, and the Havaya, the dominant letter in Havaya is the Yud, that the Yud is already present there, but we said it's only, you can't compare. So now when we're learning Torah, we're pumping much more lights from Chachma into Gan Eden. And he's going to add even more, even a touch of the Or Ein Sof, of the Roshem that's in Chachma. Chachma itself is rooted in the Esa Spheres Agnuzas, in the 10 hidden spheres. But the Roshem is from the Or Ein Sof Mamish, that's above the Gam B'chenes Or Ein Sof, and even from the Or Ein Sof, Shalamayla Ma Chachma, that's above Chachma. V'hayinu B'chenes HaKeser, which in general means the crown, which is the Soviv Kalalman. The Ramach Mitzvahs HaSeiv, and what does it have to do with mitzvahs? Why through mitzvahs do we touch the Or Ein Sof that's beyond Chachma? That's because how many mitzvahs are there? 248. How many prohibited mitzvahs are there? 365. Together, they're 613. Add to that the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, 620. It's the numeric value of Keter, crown. The Machmat says, Shesal Loisa says, Zayin mitzvahs, the Rabbanon, Tarach Amudei, these are pillars of light, drawing down the lights of Keter, which he's explaining now that the light of Keter is the light of the higher level of the Orein Sof, that Shora and Chachma. V'yesh loima, that's what he says over here, Chulu. Shazeo b'chenes ha'Orein Sof, Shashora b'Chachma. This is the Orein Sof that's dwelling in Chachma, Shen is Bar La'el, that we explained earlier, Shazeo Aroishem. This is the trace Ma'Orein Sof Abligvul from the real Orein Sof Abligvul. Liyois, what does that mean? Bottom line, Liyois, it should be big Gan Eden, in Gan Eden. Gan Eden is already a limited light. It's a light that's already going into vessels. It's part of the creation. It's part of a limited world. The limited world should touch and be infused with the Sof of Kalam, with the infinite light. To reveal the Orein Sof that's infinite and above the world, that dwells in Chachma, that it should actually touch base and connect to the indwelling light. This is regular Torah mitzvahs. The next class we're going to see how in Para Aduma we accomplish this on steroids. Much more powerful, far more potent, as we're going to see, because it's tshuva. And that's why it's done outside, and that's why you need a lazar, and so forth. So let's hold off over here, and in the next class, we're going to get this next idea.